The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of energy and destiny. But what happens when something ancient, something created by powers that predate galaxies themselves, crashes through the veil between realities and brings with it a different kind of cosmic power? One that answers to no force, light or dark. The Domo had survived 7,000 years on Earth. It had weathered ice ages, continental shifts, and the rise and fall of countless civilizations. But it was never designed to survive what the Celestials' final emergence protocol had unleashed. A desperate, reality-tearing wormhole that ripped the great ship from Earth's orbit and hurled it across dimensional barriers into a galaxy it was never meant to reach. Ajak felt the transition like a blade through her consciousness. The Celestials' presence, that constant background hum that had guided every decision for millennia, simply ceased. Silence. Terrible, absolute silence where divine purpose had once resided. "Shields failing," Fastos shouted from the engineering station, his hands moving frantically across holographic interfaces that flickered and died. "The ship's trying to compensate for... I don't even know what this is. The energy signatures here are all wrong. It's like the universe itself runs on different physics." The Domo screamed through the void, trailing fire and crystalline debris. Through the viewport, stars wheeled in unfamiliar configurations. Constellations Ajak had memorized over 70 centuries were simply gone, replaced by a cosmos that felt fundamentally foreign. "Where's Earth?" Sprite's young voice cracked with uncharacteristic fear. "I can't find it. I can't find anything I recognize." Cersei gripped the console beside her, her matter transmutation powers flickering instinctively around her fingers as if searching for something familiar to reshape. "We're not in our universe anymore. I can feel it. The cosmic energy here, it's not answering the same way." "Then make it answer," Icarus growled, his eyes already glowing with power as he prepared for whatever threat awaited. "We're Eternals. We adapt." A proximity alarm shrieked through the bridge. Makari appeared in a blur of motion, her hands signing rapidly. Massive ship, wedge-shaped, moving to intercept. The thing that emerged from hyperspace was a nightmare of Imperial engineering, a star destroyer, its dagger profile bristling with turbo laser batteries and tractor beam projectors. To the Eternals, it looked primitive, almost crude compared to celestial technology. But there was something undeniably threatening about its utilitarian design, its surfaces unmarked by beauty, built only for dominance. "They're hailing us," Fastos said, confusion crossing his face. "In a language I've never heard, but the translation matrix is... It's working? How is it working?" The communication crackled to life. The voice was human, but clipped with military precision and an accent that carried Imperial authority. "Unidentified vessel. This is Star Destroyer Inexorable. You have entered restricted Imperial space. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will be met with immediate destruction." Ajak straightened, her leader's instincts overriding the disorientation of their arrival. "Thena, Gilgamesh. Prepare for possible combat." "Druig, I need you to..." "Let me handle this," Druig interrupted, his eyes already shifting to their distinctive golden glow. "Mind control works in any universe, Ajak. I can feel them out there, thousands of minds, all bound by chains of loyalty and fear. One word from me and... No." Ajak's voice carried 7 millennia of authority. "We don't know these people. We don't know their culture, their conflicts, their place in this galaxy's natural evolution. The Celestials sent us to protect humanity, not to interfere in..." "The Celestials are gone!" Druig's shout echoed through the bridge. "Can't you feel it? That silence in your head? We're alone, Ajak. For the first time in our entire existence, we get to make our own choices. And my choice is that I'm tired of watching humans suffer when I could help them." "Help them?" Kingo scoffed, energy crackling around his fingers. "We don't even know who these people are." The Star Destroyer's forward batteries lit up, crimson energy lancing across the void. The first turbo laser blasts struck the Domo's failing shields, and the entire ship shuddered. Warning klaxons blared. Sections of the hull, already damaged from the dimensional transit, began venting atmosphere. "They're not waiting for a response," Icarus said coldly. "They're just shooting." Thena was already moving, her cosmic energy coalescing into gleaming golden weapons. Spear, sword, and shield materializing from pure power. "Then we show them what Eternals are made of." "Everyone hold on." Phastos yanked hard on the controls, trying to coax evasive maneuvers from systems that were hemorrhaging power. The Domo rolled, barely avoiding another barrage, but it was clear they couldn't run. The Star Destroyer was faster, its tractor beams already reaching out like invisible hands. Ajak closed her eyes, reaching for the Celestial's guidance one final time. But there was nothing. Only the screaming alarms, the shouts of her family, and a choice that would define them in this new reality. "Phastos, can we jump? Leave this system?" "Jump to where?" he shot back. "I don't have maps of this galaxy. I don't even know if our hyperdrive is compatible with their version of faster-than-light travel. If I engage it now, we could end up inside a star." Another impact rocked the ship. This time, something critical gave way. The lights flickered, and the artificial gravity cut out for 3 seconds before emergency systems engaged. Through the viewport, Ajak could see smaller ships launching from the Star Destroyer's hangars, TIE fighters, dozens of them, screaming toward the Domo like a swarm of mechanical insects. Their twin ion engines shrieked even through the vacuum, and sound that somehow carried an impression of threat. Cersei touched Ajak's arm gently. "What do we do?" It was the question that had defined the Eternals since their creation. Protect humanity from deviance. That was the simple directive. But here, in this impossible moment, with no Celestials to guide them and violence closing in from all sides, Ajak realized they were truly free for the first time. Free to choose, free to act, free to be wrong. And somehow, that freedom was more terrifying than 7,000 years of servitude had ever been. "We survive," Ajak said finally. "And then we learn what kind of galaxy we've landed in. Icarus, Thena, Gilgamesh, prepare for defensive combat only. We disable their fighters, not kill. Phastos, emergency landing protocols. Find us the nearest planet." "Druig," she met his golden eyes with a hard stare. "No mind control unless I give the order. We don't know what we're dealing with." "Spoken like someone still following orders from gods that abandoned us," Druig muttered. But he didn't argue further. The TIE fighters opened fire, emerald laser bolts cutting through space. And the Eternals, ancient protectors of a world now impossibly far away, went to war in a galaxy that had never heard their name. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. Admiral Davos Valen had served the Empire for 15 years, rising through the ranks by following 3 simple principles: efficiency, loyalty, and the immediate elimination of threats. The unidentified vessel tumbling through his patrol sector violated every protocol in the Imperial Navy handbook, which meant it was either rebel scum testing new technology or something far worse. Through the bridge viewport of the Inexorable, he watched his TIE squadrons engage the strange crystalline ship. The vessel looked like no design he'd ever encountered, neither rebel nor pirate, not even matching any of the exotic alien architectures cataloged in Imperial databases. Its hull seemed to shimmer with an inner light, almost organic in the way it moved, and that alone made him deeply uneasy. "Status report," Valen commanded, his voice cutting through the bridge's controlled chaos. "Sir, the target vessel is damaged but still maneuvering," his tactical officer reported. TIE leader reports unusual defensive capabilities. 3 fighters lost, but not to conventional weapons fire. Valen's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "Sir, the pilots report seeing people in space without suits. One of them destroyed Lieutenant Carr's fighter with some kind of energy beam from their eyes. Another moved so fast our targeting computers couldn't track them. And there's a woman who appears to be creating weapons out of thin air." For a moment, Valen wondered if his crew had been sampling contraband spice. Then his sensors officer confirmed the impossible readings, and he realized they were facing something entirely outside his experience. "Those aren't ships or droids," the sensors officer said, his voice uncertain. "They're individuals. 10 distinct life signs, all reading humanoid, but with energy signatures that are... Admiral, I've never seen anything like this. It's like they're powered by miniature reactors." Valen's jaw tightened. Enhanced beings. The Emperor had always been obsessed with hunting down force-sensitive individuals, anyone who posed a potential threat to his absolute power. These beings, whatever they were, would be of great interest to Lord Vader. "Intensify forward batteries," Valen ordered. "I want that ship disabled and boarded. Whatever they are, the Emperor will want them alive." Outside the Star Destroyer, Icarus carved through the TIE fighters with brutal efficiency. His heat vision sliced through their solar panels and ion engines, sending them spiraling away rather than exploding. Ajak's orders had been clear. But with each fighter disabled, 2 more seemed to take its place. "There's too many of them!" Kingo shouted through the comms, his energy blasts destroying incoming laser fire before it could reach the domo. "And that big ship, it's charging up something massive!" Thena spun through the vacuum, her cosmic weapons flashing as she deflected laser bolts that would have torn through the domo's hull. Despite the grace of her movements, frustration etched across her face. These were trained soldiers following orders, not deviants threatening humanity's existence. Every fighter she disabled felt like a compromise of what she was created to do. Makari was everywhere at once, her super speed allowing her to physically push TIE fighters off their attack vectors, redirecting them with precisely calculated impacts that sent them tumbling but intact. Through the domo's damaged hull, she signed to Phastos. "How long until we can jump?" "Jump drives are completely fried," Phastos shouted back, rewiring systems with hands that moved almost as fast as Makari could run. "I'm trying to understand their faster-than-light technology by scanning that big ship, but it's like nothing I've seen. Hyperspace? What the hell is hyperspace? And why does it require calculating around gravity wells? The physics here are insane." Inside the domo's bridge, Ajak felt the weight of command pressing down harder than it had in centuries. They were defending themselves against an enemy they didn't understand, in a galaxy whose rules they didn't know, without the Celestials' guidance to tell them if they were making the right choice. Druig stood beside her, his golden eyes tracking the battle through the screens. "Let me end this," he said quietly. "I can reach their minds from here. All of them. The pilots, the gunners, everyone on that ship. One command, and they'll stand down." "And then what?" Ajak challenged. "We control an entire military vessel? How long can you maintain that? How many ships will come looking for this one?" "As many as I need to control," Druig replied, his voice edged with something dangerous. "Ajak, we're losing. The domo can't take much more of this, and our family is exposed in vacuum fighting a battle we don't need to fight. I can save them. I can save us. All you have to do is let me." Cersei moved between them, her hands raised placatingly. There has to be another way. We can communicate, explain that we're not their enemy. An explosion rocked the domo as a TIE bomber's payload found its mark. The entire port side buckled, atmosphere venting from multiple breaches. Sprite screamed as she was nearly sucked into space, saved only by Gilgamesh's massive hand catching her ankle. "Ajak!" Phastos's voice was ragged with desperation. "Main power's failing. I need 10 minutes I don't have." Through the viewport, Ajak could see the Star Destroyer's tractor beams activating, multiple projectors creating an invisible cage that began pulling the domo inexorably closer. Once they were in that hangar, surrounded by stormtroopers and whatever other forces the Empire could bring to bear, the choice would be made for them. She thought of the Celestials' last directive before they'd been torn from Earth. Protect humanity. But which humanity? The one they'd left behind, or the ones flying these fighters? The ones commanding that massive warship? In this galaxy, were they protectors or invaders? "Druig," Ajak said finally, each word feeling like a betrayal of everything she'd stood for. "Just the pilots. Make them pull back. Nothing permanent." Druig's smile was triumphant and terrifying. His eyes blazed pure gold as his consciousness reached out across the void, touching thousands of minds simultaneously. It should have been impossible at this distance, but Druig had always been the most powerful mind controller among them. And in this moment, freed from celestial restraint, he let his full power unfold. On the bridge of the inexorable, Admiral Valen suddenly stiffened. Every officer around him did the same, their eyes flickering gold for just a moment before returning to normal. Their hands moved to their consoles, but not with their own will. "Admiral?" his tactical officer said, his voice strained. I'm ordering the TIE fighters to break off." Why am I ordering them to break off? Valen's own hands betrayed him, entering commands that powered down the tractor beams and repositioned the Star Destroyer to a safer distance. Inside his mind, he felt something vast and ancient pushing against his thoughts, compelling obedience. He tried to fight it, tried to reassert control, but it was like fighting a tide. The TIE fighters wheeled away from the domo, their pilots confused and frightened by their own actions. Some screamed into their comms, asking for orders, wondering what was happening. But their hands kept pulling back, kept retreating, kept following the will of something they couldn't see or understand. "Now, Phastos," Ajak commanded. "Get us out of here." "I don't have coordinates," Phastos shouted back. But his hands were already moving, cobbling together a hybrid system that married celestial technology with the principles he'd hastily scanned from the Star Destroyer. "This is going to be rough." The domo's damaged engines screamed to life. Space folded in a way that felt wrong to everyone aboard, like reality itself was protesting. For a moment, they existed in two places at once, both beside the Imperial vessel and somewhere far away. Then, with a sound like tearing fabric, they were gone. Admiral Valen gasped as the golden presence released his mind. Around him, his crew doubled over, several vomiting from the psychic intrusion. The mysterious ship had vanished from sensors entirely, leaving only debris and disabled TIE fighters in its wake. "Get me a secure channel to Coruscant," Valen ordered, his voice shaking with rage and fear. "I need to speak with Imperial intelligence and send a priority message to Lord Vader's fleet. Whatever those beings were, they're beyond anything we're equipped to handle." He stared at the empty space where the vessel had been. And for the first time in his career, Admiral Davos Valen felt genuine fear of something that wasn't the Emperor's wrath. In the silence of hyperspace, or whatever approximation of it Phastos had managed, the Eternals regrouped in the domo's damaged bridge. They'd survived their first encounter with this new galaxy. But as Ajak met Druig's satisfied gaze, she realized they'd also crossed a line they could never uncross. They'd interfered, and in doing so, they'd announced their presence to a galaxy that would now be hunting them. The planet Phastos found was called Dantooine, a remote agricultural world in the Outer Rim, far from Imperial patrols and hyperspace lanes. The Domo crash-landed in a grassy plateau surrounded by ancient ruins, its crystalline hull now scarred and broken in ways that would have been unthinkable just days ago. The ship that had protected them for 7,000 years was dying, and with it, the last tangible connection to their purpose. Ajak stood in the ruins of what had once been their assembly hall, staring at the damage with weary eyes. Around her, the Eternals worked in tense silence. Phastos and Makari were attempting to salvage critical systems. Thena and Gilgamesh stood guard at the perimeter. Icarus hovered above, scanning for threats with eyes that could see across continents. But it was the conversations happening in small groups throughout the ship that worried her most. "We can't keep running," Kingo said, his usually jovial demeanor replaced by grim pragmatism. He stood with Sprite and Cersei near one of the hull breaches, watching the twin suns set over Dantooine's endless plains. "Sooner or later, those Empire people are going to find us. And when they do, we need to have decided what we are in this galaxy." "What we've always been," Sprite replied, though her voice lacked conviction. "Protectors. We protect humanity from threats they can't handle themselves." "But which humanity?" Cersei asked quietly, echoing Ajak's own thoughts from the battle. "The ones in those fighters we disabled? They seemed human to me. What if the deviants here are different? What if the threat is different?" Nearby, Druig sat alone on a piece of fallen hull plating, his eyes closed in what looked like meditation, but was actually something far more invasive. His consciousness stretched out across Dantooine, touching the minds of the farming colonists who lived in scattered settlements across the planet. He felt their thoughts, their fears, their carefully hidden hatred of the Empire that taxed them into poverty while offering nothing in return. "Druig," Ajak's voice cut through his concentration. "Stop." His golden eyes opened slowly. "Stop what?" "Learning, understanding. These people are suffering, Ajak. The Empire you're so worried about offending? They're tyrants. I've seen it in 1,000 minds across this planet. Fear, oppression, families torn apart when their children are conscripted into military service, resources stripped to feed an endless war machine. And you learned all this by invading their private thoughts, Ajak said coldly. Without permission, without their knowledge. "I learned it by caring enough to look," Druig shot back. He stood, his hands clenched into fists. "For 7,000 years, you made us watch. Watch humanity suffer through wars, plagues, genocides, all because the Celestials said we couldn't interfere in natural human evolution. Well, the Celestials are gone, Ajak. We're free. And I'm not going to stand by and watch anymore. So what's your solution?" Icarus descended from above, landing between them with enough force to crack the metal beneath his feet. "Take over? Control everyone's minds until they do what you think is right? That's not protection, Druig. That's tyranny." "Is it?" Druig's voice was dangerous now. "Or is it the only way to actually save people instead of just watching them destroy themselves? I've touched the minds on that Imperial ship. The Admiral, the officers, the Stormtroopers. You know what I found? Most of them aren't evil. They're just following orders, trapped in a system that punishes dissent with death. I could free them. I could free millions, billions. All it would take is becoming exactly what you claim to hate," Thena finished, stepping into the clearing with Gilgamesh at her side. Her cosmic weapons were dismissed, but her eyes held the hardness of a warrior who'd fought for millennia. "Control through force is still control, Druig. It doesn't matter if your intentions are noble." You're one to talk about force, Druig sneered. How many did you kill today? None, Thena replied flatly. I followed orders. I disabled their ships. I protected my family. But I didn't pretend I was saving them while I did it. The argument was escalating into something dangerous when Phastos emerged from the domo's interior, his hands covered in oil and his expression grim. We need to talk. All of us. Now. The Eternals gathered in the open air beneath Dantooine's stars. Constellations they didn't recognize in a sky that felt alien despite its beauty. Phastos activated a holographic projection from a salvaged datapad, and what appeared made several of them step back in shock. It was a technical schematic of a space station, but calling it that felt insufficient. The thing was massive, a sphere of metal and weapons large enough to eclipse moons. And at its heart, Phastos had highlighted a weapon system that made even his genius mind recoil. This is what the Empire built, Phastos said, his voice hollow. I pulled it from encrypted files in that Star Destroyer's databanks during the battle. It's called the Death Star. Was called past tense because apparently someone already destroyed it. But here's the thing that kept me up working through the night. This weapon could destroy planets, entire planets, with a single shot. Silence. Even Druig seemed shaken. I've invented a lot of things over 7,000 years, Phastos continued, weapons included. But I always told myself there were lines I wouldn't cross. This? He gestured at the schematic. This crosses every line. This is industrial-scale genocide packaged as a deterrent. And the government we encountered? They built it. Then we know which side we're on, Cersei said softly. We fight against the Empire. We help whoever destroyed that monstrosity. Do we? Ajak interrupted, and her tone made everyone turn. Think about what you're saying. We've been in this galaxy for less than 2 days. We know nothing about its history, its conflicts, its people. Yes, the Empire built something terrible, but we don't know why. We don't know what threats they face. We don't know if whoever destroyed it is actually better or just differently terrible. So we do nothing? Kingo asked incredulously. While people suffer? We learn, Ajak insisted. We understand. We make informed decisions instead of righteous assumptions. That's what 7,000 years of protecting humanity taught me. That good intentions without wisdom lead to catastrophe. Your wisdom sounds a lot like cowardice, Druig said coldly. The words hung in the air like a blade. Ajak's expression didn't change. But something flickered in her eyes, hurt, or perhaps recognition that the fracture between them had grown too wide to bridge. Makari's hands moved in rapid sign language, and Druig translated for those who didn't understand. She says we're not just debating philosophy. There are 11 settlements on this planet, small farming communities. If the Empire comes looking for us here, what happens to them? That brought everyone up short. They'd been so focused on their internal debate that they hadn't considered the immediate consequences of their presence. The Empire will come, Ikaris stated with certainty. They saw what we can do. They'll want us, either as weapons or as threats to eliminate. And when they come, anyone near us becomes collateral damage. So we leave, Sprite suggested. Find somewhere uninhabited. Figure out our next move without endangering anyone. Or, Druig said, his voice taking on a persuasive tone that made several Eternals tense. We make this planet somewhere the Empire can't touch. I could protect these people. Reach out to every settlement, every mind. If Imperial forces come, they'll find a population united in purpose. Impossible to subjugate because they'll all share one will. Mine. That's not protection. Cersei's shout surprised everyone, including herself. She was usually the peacemaker, but something about Druig's proposal horrified her on a fundamental level. That's possession. You turn them into extensions of yourself. I'd keep them alive, Druig countered, which is more than Ajak's precious non-interference ever accomplished. Gilgamesh stepped forward, his massive frame somehow radiating calm despite the tension. Maybe we're asking the wrong question, he said in his gentle rumble. It's not about whether we act or don't act. It's about who we are without the Celestials telling us. Are we still Eternals? Are we still a family? Or did we only work as long as someone else was making the decisions? The question struck deeper than any argument. They'd been created as a team, designed to function as complementary parts of a whole. But the Celestials had been the unifying force, the purpose that bound them. Without that... I need to walk, Ajak said abruptly. She turned away from the group, heading toward the ancient ruins that dotted the plateau. No one followed. They all recognized the dismissal for what it was. As she walked through structures older than her own considerable age, Ajak realized that for the first time in 7,000 years, she had no idea what to do. The Celestials had given her wisdom and healing, but they'd never given her the tools to lead people who were genuinely free to disagree. Behind her, the debate continued. Voices rose and fell. Druig's golden eyes flickered as he considered the sleeping minds across Dantooine. Phastos stared at the Death Star schematic, his inventor's mind already imagining how to fight such a weapon. Cersei looked at the stars and wondered which one had been her home. And in the darkness between worlds, Admiral Valen's message reached Imperial Center. In the Emperor's throne room on Coruscant, Darth Vader listened to the report of beings with impossible powers, and his thoughts turned dark with possibility. The Eternals had 48 hours before the Empire arrived. They had 48 hours to decide who they were, and what that meant for a galaxy that had never asked for their protection. Druig left at dawn, not in secret. He made no attempt to hide his departure. He simply walked away from the crashed domo, away from Ajak's indecision and Icarus's judgment, down into the valley where the nearest farming settlement nestled against a river bend. Makari saw him go, her super speed allowing her to intercept him before he reached the settlement's edge. But her hands moved hesitantly in the morning light. Don't do this. Don't do what? Druig asked, not breaking stride. Talk to people? Learn about their lives? Or are you asking me not to help them? You know what I mean. Don't take over their minds. I'm not going to take over anything, Druig said, but there was something in his tone that made even that sound like a lie he told himself. I'm just going to guide them. Show them what's possible when humans work together instead of fighting. These people are struggling, Makari. Their crops are failing because the Empire takes most of their harvest. Their children go hungry while Star Destroyers patrol their skies. I can fix that. At what cost? Druig finally stopped, turning to face her. His eyes weren't glowing gold yet, but she could see the power coiling behind them, ready to be unleashed. The cost of watching them suffer would be higher. I've done that for 7,000 years. I won't do it anymore. He left her there, standing in the tall grass as the twin suns painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Makari didn't follow. She just watched until he disappeared into the settlement, and then she ran back to warn the others. By the time Ajak and Icarus reached the settlement, it was already too late. The change was subtle at first. The farmers moved with unusual coordination, their individual tasks flowing into a collective effort that seemed almost choreographed. Children played without fighting, adults worked without complaining. Everyone smiled with the same serene expression, and when Ajak looked into their eyes, she saw the faintest flicker of gold. Druig stood in the settlement center, surrounded by people who gazed at him with something between adoration and the blank contentment of the controlled. He looked more at peace than Ajak had seen him in centuries. "Let them go," Ajak said quietly. "They don't want to be let go," Druig replied. He gestured to the settlers around him. "Ask them. They'll tell you they've never been happier. No more fear of Imperial raids, no more hunger, no more watching their loved ones suffer. I've given them peace." "You've given them slavery," Icarus growled, his eyes beginning to glow red. "Release them, Druig. Now." "Or what?" Druig's eyes blazed gold in response. "You'll kill me? Kill them? Because that's what would happen if you attack me, Icarus. My connection to their minds means if I die in pain, they die in pain. So tell me, O mighty protector, are you willing to murder 200 innocent people to prove a point?" Icarus's heat vision faded, but his fists remained clenched. The trap was perfect, and they all knew it. A young woman stepped forward from the crowd, her movements fluid but somehow off, like a puppet on invisible strings. "The Empire is coming," she said in a voice that was hers, but carried Druig's inflection. 3 Imperial transport ships carrying 6 companies of Stormtroopers and 2 ATST walkers. They'll arrive in 36 hours. Admiral Valen wants the beings who humiliated him. He wants to make an example. The woman's eyes flickered, and for just a moment, her own consciousness surfaced, confused and frightened before Druig's control reasserted itself. Ajak saw that flicker, and something inside her hardened. "You're using them," she said, her voice colder than Icarus had ever heard it. "Like tools, like the Celestials used us." That struck home. Druig flinched, and for a moment his control wavered. Several settlers gasped, suddenly aware of the golden presence in their minds before it clamped down again, gentler this time, but no less absolute. "It's not the same," Druig insisted. "The Celestials created us as weapons for their agenda. I'm protecting these people. There's a difference." "Is there?" Cersei had arrived with the others, the entire Eternal family now assembled in the settlement square. Her voice was sad rather than accusatory. "Because from here, it looks like you've decided what's best for them, without asking. Just like the Celestials did to us, just like the Empire does to everyone." "The Empire would kill them," Druig shouted, his composure cracking. "That's the choice, Cersei. My control or their death. Which would you choose?" "I'd choose freedom," Phastos said, stepping forward with a device in his hands. "Even if it meant risk. Even if it meant some of them might die. Because that's what being alive means. Making your own choices and living with the consequences." Druig laughed bitterly. "Says the man who invented weapons that killed thousands. Tell me, Phastos, did those people have a choice when your technology ended their lives?" The words hit like a physical blow. Phastos had carried that guilt for millennia, watching his inventions twisted into instruments of war. And Druig knew exactly where to strike. But Phastos didn't back down. "You're right," he said quietly. "I created things that hurt people, and I've spent centuries trying to make up for that. But this," he gestured at the controlled settlers, "this is worse. Because at least the people who died by my inventions died as themselves. You're killing who these people are and replacing them with puppets that look like humans, but only exist to serve your will. I'm saving them." Druig's power flared, and suddenly all 200 settlers moved as one, forming a protective wall between him and the other Eternals. Farmers raised improvised tools like weapons. Children stood with the same blank, ready expression as their parents. It was horrifying in its coordination. Thena's cosmic weapons materialized instantly. "If you make them fight us, We will defend ourselves." "Then their blood is on your hands, not mine," Druig said. But there was something desperate in his voice now. Something that suggested even he wasn't sure he believed it anymore. The standoff held for a long moment. Two families, biological and chosen, facing each other across an ideological chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. Then Ajak did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She walked forward, past the line of controlled settlers, past their vacant eyes and ready weapons, directly to Druig. She didn't fight, didn't argue. She just looked at him with 7,000 years of shared history in her gaze. "I failed you," she said softly. "For all those centuries. When you begged to help and I said no. When you asked to interfere and I invoked the Celestial's will. I failed you. Because you were right. There were times we should have acted. Times when non-interference was just cowardice dressed up as wisdom." Druig's eyes widened slightly. In 7 millennia, he'd never heard Ajak admit she was wrong. "But this," Ajak continued, gesturing at the controlled settlers, "this isn't the answer either. This is you making the same mistake in reverse. You're so afraid of being powerless to help that you're taking away everyone else's power to choose. And that's not protection, Druig. That's just a different kind of failure. So what do you suggest?" Druig's voice cracked slightly. "We just let the Empire come? Let them question these people, torture them for information about us. Maybe kill them, as an example? You want me to stand by and watch that?" "No," Ajak said. "I want you to trust them to make their own choice. And I want us to stand with them, whatever they decide. Not as controllers, not as distant watchers, as allies." She turned to address the settlers directly, speaking past Druig's control to whatever piece of their consciousness remained free. "If you can hear me, if any part of you is still your own, know this. The beings who attacked us are coming here looking for us. We'll leave if that's what you want. We'll fight if you ask us to. But it has to be your choice, not ours, not his." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, painfully, one of the settlers, an older man with weathered hands and eyes that had seen too many hard seasons, began to fight back against Druig's control. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His hands trembled, but his mouth opened, and words emerged that were entirely his own. "Let us choose." The dam broke. All across the settlement, people began to resist. Not violently, but with the quiet determination of those who'd spent lifetimes being told what to do and had finally had enough. Druig's control slipped, then shattered, and 200 minds suddenly flooded back into 200 bodies. The settlers collapsed, gasping, many crying or vomiting from the psychic whiplash. But they were themselves again, and in their eyes was something more valuable than Druig's imposed peace. Defiant, terrified, glorious freedom. Druig fell to his knees, his face stricken. "I could have protected you," he whispered to the settlers, who now looked at him with fear and betrayal. "I could have kept you safe." "We don't want your safety," the old man said, his voice shaking, but clear. "We want our lives." Ajak helped Druig to his feet, though he wouldn't meet her eyes. As she led him back toward the domo, she heard the settlers beginning to talk among themselves, arguing about what to do, whether to evacuate or prepare to fight, whether to trust these strange beings who'd brought danger to their doorstep. It was messy, chaotic, uncertain. It was human. And hovering far above in geosynchronous orbit, an Imperial probe droid recorded everything, its transmissions already racing through hyperspace toward the approaching fleet. Phastos didn't sleep. He couldn't afford to. In the 36 hours since Druig's failed attempt at protection, The inventor had transformed a section of the domo's damaged interior into something between a workshop and a war room. Holographic displays flickered across every surface, showing schematics of Imperial technology he'd pulled from the Star Destroyer's databases, topographical maps of Dantooine's plateau, and half-finished designs for weapons he swore he'd never build again. But that was before he'd seen the Death Star. "Tell me again why we're not just leaving," Kingo said, watching Phastos work with a mixture of fascination and concern. "The settlers chose to evacuate 3 of their settlements. We could go with them, find somewhere the Empire won't look." "Because there is nowhere the Empire won't look," Phastos replied without pausing in his work. His hands moved through holographic interfaces, manipulating matter at the molecular level, coaxing celestial technology to interface with principles it was never designed to understand. "This galaxy is under totalitarian control. Thousands of systems, millions of worlds, all held in place by fear and overwhelming military force. If we run, we'll just be running forever. Or until they catch us," Icarus added. He stood at the entrance to the makeshift workshop, his arms crossed and his expression grim. The probe droid Thena destroyed yesterday transmitted for 43 seconds before she took it down. That's enough time to confirm our location and capabilities. Makari appeared in a blur, her hands signing rapidly. Phastos had learned to read her sign language centuries ago, but even he struggled to keep up when she was agitated. 6 Imperial transports just exited hyperspace. They're in high orbit. Deployment in progress. "Showtime," Phastos muttered, making final adjustments to the devices spread across his workbench. "Everybody gear up, and someone get Druig. We're going to need everyone for this." Finding Druig wasn't difficult. He'd been sitting alone in the settlement's abandoned square since the evacuation. Surrounded by empty homes and the ghosts of the peace he'd tried to impose, when Cersei approached, he didn't look up. "They hate me," he said quietly. "The settlers. Before they left, I could feel it. Not just fear, actual hatred. I tried to save them, and now they look at me like I'm the monster." Cersei sat beside him on the dusty ground. "You took away their choice. That's unforgivable to people who have so little control over their lives already." "I know," Druig said, his voice hollow. "I know that now. But Cersei, when I had them under my control, I could feel everything they felt. Their fear of the Empire, their desperation. The father who watches his children go hungry because the Imperial tax collectors take everything. The mother who lost her son to conscription. The old woman who remembers when this planet was free. I felt all of it, and I just wanted to make it stop. By making them stop feeling," Cersei said gently. "That's not the same as making them safe." Before Druig could respond, the ground trembled. Not violently, but with the steady, rhythmic impact of something massive making contact with the planet's surface. Through the valley, they could see the Imperial landing craft descending on pillars of blue thrust, 6 of them, each carrying a full company of stormtroopers and heavy equipment. "Come on," Cersei said, pulling Druig to his feet. "You want to help people? Here's your chance. But this time, we do it without taking away who they are." The Imperial forces established a perimeter with mechanical efficiency. Captain Voss, a career officer who'd cut his teeth putting down separatist holdouts during the Clone Wars, surveyed the area with professional detachment. The settlement was abandoned, but his scouts had reported movement near the crashed vessel on the plateau, the same crystalline ship from Admiral Valen's report. "2 companies advance on the target," Voss ordered through his comlink. "ATSTs provide fire support. Heavy weapons teams set up suppression positions. These targets have demonstrated significant combat capability. Authorization is given for lethal force." 200 stormtroopers began their advance, their white armor gleaming in the afternoon sun. The two AT-ST walkers strode alongside them, their massive feet crushing the settlement's simple structures as they moved. To Voss, this was a standard operation. Overwhelming force applied to an isolated target with no air support or reinforcements. By the book. Clean, simple. He had no idea what he was walking into. The Eternals met them at the settlement's edge, standing in a line that looked almost ceremonial. Phastos had distributed his hastily constructed devices, energy shields, kinetic dampeners, and weapons that bridged celestial technology with principles stolen from Imperial engineering. They hummed with potential, and wearing them, the Eternals looked less like refugees and more like the warriors they'd been created to be. Final warning. Captain Voss's amplified voice echoed across the valley. You are in violation of Imperial law. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. You have 30 seconds to comply. Ajak stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice carried with a power that had once commanded deviance and now faced down an empire. We're not your enemy. We're not rebels. We're not even from this galaxy. All we want is to repair our ship and leave in peace. 20 seconds. But if you force us to fight, Ajak continued, you need to understand what you're facing. We've protected humanity for 7,000 years. We've fought things that would make your nightmares look like children's stories. And we have never, in all that time, lost. 10 seconds. Icarus's eyes began to glow. Thena's cosmic weapons materialized in her hands. Gilgamesh cracked his knuckles, each popped like a gunshot. Kingo's fingers crackled with energy. And Phastos activated his devices, shields blooming around each Eternal like translucent flowers of pure force. Time's up, Captain Voss said. All units, weapons free. The valley erupted in fire. Blaster bolts filled the air like crimson rain, hundreds of shots per second from 200 stormtroopers firing in coordinated volleys. The AT-STs opened up with their chin-mounted cannons, heavy repeating blasters that could punch through starship hulls. The sound was deafening, a continuous roar of energy weapons discharging in what should have been an unstoppable wall of destruction. The Eternals walked through it like it wasn't there. Phastos' shields absorbed the blaster fire, each bolt dissipating against barriers that operated on principles the Empire's weapons weren't designed to counter. When an AT-ST's cannon fire became too concentrated, Icarus simply looked at it. One precise burst of heat vision that melted through the walker's armor plating and detonated its power core. The machine collapsed, and 50 stormtroopers dove for cover. Makari became a blur, moving so fast that the stormtroopers' targeting computers couldn't track her. She disarmed them with surgical precision, her super speed allowing her to pluck blaster rifles from their hands before they could even register her presence. Within seconds, 20 troopers stood confused and weaponless, and Makari was already moving to the next group. Fall back, Captain Voss ordered, his tactical training warring with disbelief at what he was seeing. Heavy weapons. Concentrate fire on. Thena was already among his heavy weapons teams. Her spear manifested mid-sprint, and she used the blunt end to smash aside a tripod-mounted E-web repeater. The gunner tried to draw his sidearm, but she swept his legs and moved on before he hit the ground. No killing. Ajak's orders were clear, but that didn't mean she had to be gentle. Gilgamesh charged the second AT-ST with his characteristic directness. The walker's pilot saw him coming and opened fire, but the big Eternal simply raised his arms and took the hits on Phastos' shields. Then he reached the walker, grabbed one of its massive legs, and pulled. Metal screamed. Hydraulics burst. The entire machine toppled sideways with a crash that shook the valley floor. Kingo provided covering fire, his energy projectiles precisely aimed to destroy weapons, not people. Each blast knocked blaster rifles from stormtroopers' hands or disabled the power packs on their armor. It was almost playful the way he worked, like he was performing for an audience. But the results were devastating to Imperial morale. And Druig did nothing. He stood at the back of the eternal line, his eyes normal, his hands at his sides, watching the battle unfold around him. He could feel the minds of the stormtroopers, their training, their fear, their absolute certainty that they were about to die, facing enemies beyond their understanding. One touch of his power and they would simply stop, put down their weapons, walk away. It would be so easy. But he'd promised, not to Ajak, to himself. He'd seen what his control looked like reflected in the settlers' eyes, and he'd finally understood what he'd always refused to admit, that taking away choice, even for good reasons, made him no different from the empire he despised. So he just stood there, useless and furious, while his family fought a battle he could end with a thought. Captain Voss realized he was going to lose. These weren't rebels with stolen Imperial weapons. These weren't Jedi with their force tricks and laser swords. These were something else entirely, beings who operated on a level his training hadn't prepared him for. The smart play was retreat, regroup, call for reinforcements, live to fight another day. But Captain Voss was an Imperial officer, and retreat meant failure, and failure meant discipline from Admiral Valen, and Admiral Valen answered to people who didn't accept excuses. "Airstrike," he said into his comlink, his voice tight. "Authorization code Voss 7 Gamma. Target coordinates on the crashed vessel. Level it." High above, the Imperial transports rotated in orbit, their bomb bays opening. Phastos' sensors screamed warning a split second before the first ordnance left its racks. "Everyone to me!" Phastos shouted. "Now!" The Eternals converged on his position just as the bombs hit. Conventional explosives mixed with proton warheads, enough firepower to vaporize the settlement and everyone in it. The explosions were world-ending, a column of fire that reached toward the sky like an angry god's fist. When the smoke cleared, Captain Voss expected to see nothing but a crater. Instead, he saw a dome of golden energy, and beneath it, the Eternals stood unharmed. Phastos' shield generator, the device he'd been building for 36 hours straight, had held. Barely. The inventor was on his knees, blood running from his nose from the strain of channeling that much power through celestial technology operating in an alien universe. But they'd survived. And in the Domo's damaged databanks, automated systems recorded the energy signature of the proton warheads. Phastos' exhausted mind made the connection even through his pain. The same weapon type, the same destructive principle. Imperial technology shared the Death Star's fundamental design philosophy, overwhelming destruction as the answer to every problem. These people had built a weapon that could kill planets because killing was all they understood. The Imperial retreat was less an organized withdrawal and more a rout. Captain Voss's remaining forces scrambled back to their transports under covering fire that came too late and too scattered to make a difference. They left behind disabled ATSTs, dozens of disarmed stormtroopers too injured or shocked to evacuate, and the distinct impression that they'd just engaged something far beyond Imperial standard threat assessment protocols. In the settling dust of the battlefield, Ajak knelt beside Phastos, her hands glowing with healing energy as she worked to repair the damage his extreme exertion had caused. Blood vessels had burst throughout his body from channeling power through technology that was never meant to handle such strain. His hands shook uncontrollably. "That shield generator is scrap now," he muttered through gritted teeth as Ajak's healing warmth spread through him. "One-time use. Next time they bomb us, we won't have—" "There won't be a next time," Icarus interrupted, landing beside them with an unconscious stormtrooper slung over his shoulder. "We're leaving. Tonight. This planet isn't safe for anyone anymore, and staying just paints a target on every settlement within 100 kilometers. "With what ship?" Kingo asked, gesturing at the Domo's smoking hull. Phastos has been cannibalizing parts for weapons. We can barely maintain life support, let alone achieve escape velocity. Thena approached from the battlefield's edge, her cosmic weapons still manifested and dripping with hydraulic fluid from the ATSTs. Then we take theirs, those transports in orbit. We disable their crews, commandeer one, and become pirates, Cersei finished quietly. She was tending to the injured stormtroopers who'd been left behind, using her transmutation powers to seal wounds and stabilize broken bones despite their terrified protests. We're talking about stealing an Imperial vessel and leaving them stranded. That's an act of war. They bombed us, Icarus shot back, after we offered to leave peacefully. What do you call that? Imperial standard operating procedure, came a weak voice. The stormtrooper Icarus had been carrying had regained consciousness, his helmet cracked enough to reveal frightened human eyes beneath. You're unknowns, potential threats. The Empire doesn't negotiate with threats. It eliminates them. Ajak finished healing Phastos and turned her attention to the stormtrooper, her expression unreadable. What's your name? TK-7642, he responded automatically, then hesitated. Kalen. My name was Kalen before I enlisted. You chose to join? Druig asked, speaking for the first time since the battle. His voice carried genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Kalen laughed bitterly. Choose? My planet couldn't meet its Imperial tithe. The options were give up half our population to conscription or have the entire colony designated non-compliant and sterilized. Some choice. The word sterilized hung in the air like a curse. Phastos' expression darkened. Define sterilized. Orbital bombardment, Kalen said flatly. Total atmospheric incineration. The Empire has protocols. When a planet becomes more trouble than it's worth, they just erase it. Clean slate for new colonization. I've seen it twice. Orders from Sector Command. No trials, no appeals. Just coordinates and firing solutions. Cersei's hands stilled on the trooper she was healing. You're lying. I wish I was. Kalen gestured to the other injured stormtroopers scattered across the battlefield. Ask any of them. We all know someone who disappeared because their world asked questions the wrong way. That's the Empire, lady. You're either useful or you're gone. Akari's hands moved in sharp, angry signs. This is what we're protecting? This is the natural human evolution we're supposed to let happen? We're not protecting the Empire, Ajak said firmly. We're trying to understand the situation before we make choices we can't take back. How much more do you need to understand? Druig's voice was rising again, his control slipping. They commit genocide as policy. They conscript people against their will. They built a weapon to blow up planets. What else do you need to see before you admit that some things are just evil? Before Ajak could respond, Gilgamesh called out from the perimeter. We've got company, not Imperial. 3 ships incoming, light freighters by the look of them. They're broadcasting on civilian channels. The ships that landed were nothing like the pristine Imperial transports. These were working vessels, scarred by use and mismatched repairs. The Dornian gunship came down first, followed by 2 Corellian freighters that looked like they'd been old during the Clone Wars. Their landing ramps deployed, and what emerged made even the Eternals pause. Humans, yes, but also Twi'leks with their distinctive head tails, Sulustans with jowled faces, Bothans with their canine features, Mon Calamari with their bulbous eyes. A dozen different species, all armed but holding their weapons lowered in a gesture that was almost but not quite peaceful. The leader was a woman in her 40s, human, with scars that spoke of a violent life and eyes that had seen too much. She wore mismatched armor, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd survived by being smarter and meaner than her opponents. "I'm Captain Lyra Ventress," she announced, her voice carrying across the battlefield. "Formerly of the Alliance to Restore the Republic. Currently freelance, but still on the side that doesn't murder planets. And you people just made a very loud statement that's going to echo across half the Outer Rim." "We defended ourselves," Ajak said carefully. "Nothing more." "You humiliated an Imperial force," Ventress corrected. "Disabled 2 walkers, disarmed 2 companies of stormtroopers, and survived an orbital bombardment. That's not defense. That's a declaration that the Empire can be beaten. Do you have any idea what that means?" Icarus bristled at her tone. "Enlighten us." Ventress gestured to her mixed-species crew. "It means hope. For the first time since Yavin, people are going to hear about beings who stood against the Empire and won without sacrificing themselves in the process. It means rebellions on a dozen worlds that were too scared to fight back. It means Imperial resources diverted to hunting you instead of oppressing populations. It means you've just become the most valuable asset the rebellion never recruited." "We're not assets," Thena said coldly, her weapons still manifested. "And we haven't chosen a side." "Then you're fools," Ventress replied bluntly, "because the Empire doesn't care about neutrality. You're either with them or against them, and you just made it very clear which category you fall into. Admiral Valen is already requesting Star Destroyer support. Within 48 hours, there will be capital ships in orbit with orders to bombard this plateau until nothing remains but glass." "So we leave," Kingo suggested again. "Take the fight somewhere else." "Where?" Ventress challenged. "This galaxy is 24 million systems under Imperial control. You can run, but eventually you'll get tired. Eventually, you'll make a mistake. And when you do, the Empire will be waiting with enough firepower to crack a moon. Your only chance is making them too afraid to commit those resources. And the only way to do that is making common cause with people who are already fighting them." "The rebellion," Cersei said, understanding dawning. "You want us to join your war." "I want you to survive," Ventress corrected. "The rebellion is just the best vehicle for that. We have safe houses, intelligence networks, supply lines. We know how the Empire thinks, how it operates, where its weak points are. Alone, you're powerful, but isolated. With us, you're powerful and informed. That's the difference between being legends and being memories." Ajak looked at her family, her fractured, exhausted, displaced family. Druig's eyes held a hunger for action that frightened her. Icarus radiated barely contained aggression. Cersei looked torn between compassion and caution. Phastos stared at the battlefield with an inventor's mind already calculating what he could build with rebel resources. Even Sprite, usually so cynical, seemed drawn to the idea of being part of something larger. "We need to discuss this," Ajak said finally. "Privately." "Of course," Ventress agreed easily. "But discuss quickly. My sensors show 3 Star Destroyers exiting hyperspace at the edge of the system. You have maybe 6 hours before they're in bombardment range. Whatever you decide fast." As the Eternals withdrew to the Domo's interior, Kalen, the injured stormtrooper, watched them go with an expression that mixed fear and desperate hope. He'd been trained to see the Empire as inevitable, as the natural order of the galaxy. But these beings had fought it and won, and that impossible victory had cracked something in the foundation of his worldview. If the Empire could be beaten, what else might be possible? Inside the Domo, the argument began immediately. "This is exactly what we shouldn't do," Ajak insisted. "Choose sides in a conflict we don't understand. Become weapons in someone else's war." "We're already weapons," Phastos countered. The question is whether we're weapons that rust in hiding or weapons that cut through tyranny. I've seen what the Empire builds. I've analyzed their technology. It's all about control and destruction. There's no innovation, no progress, just refinements on how to hurt people more efficiently. And the rebellion? Icarus asked. What makes them different? How do we know they won't be just as bad once they have power? We don't, Cersei admitted. But at least they're fighting against genocide. That has to count for something. Does it? Sprite's young voice cut through the debate. We've watched human governments rise and fall for 7,000 years. Rebels become tyrants. Liberators become oppressors. The cycle repeats. Why would this time be different? Because we could make it different, Druig said quietly. He'd been silent through most of the argument, but now his words carried weight, not by controlling them, but by standing with them, by using our power to make sure the cycle actually breaks this time. Ajak turned to him, surprised. You're advocating for helping the rebellion? You who wanted to control a settlement yesterday? I'm advocating for action instead of endless debate, Druig replied. The Empire commits genocide. They conscript slaves. They've built weapons to destroy worlds. I don't need 7,000 years of perspective to know that's wrong. And if we stand aside because we're afraid of making mistakes, we're complicit in everything they do from this moment forward. The words hung heavy in the damaged chamber. Outside, the twin suns were setting, painting Dantooine's sky in shades of blood and gold. In orbit, star destroyers began their methodical approach, their targeting computers already plotting firing solutions. And in the silence between heartbeats, the Eternals faced the choice that would define them. Hide and survive, or fight and become something this galaxy had never seen before. The message reached Darth Vader's meditation chamber while he was suspended in the darkness, his mask removed and his ravaged body exposed to the recycled air. The intrusion was unwelcome, but the Dark Lord had learned long ago that destiny rarely respected his desire for solitude. My lord, Admiral Piet's voice crackled through the chamber's comm system, appropriately hesitant. Vader's subordinates had learned the cost of interrupting him. We've received an urgent transmission from Admiral Valen's task force. The unknown beings from the Dantooine incident have resurfaced. The situation has escalated. Vader's meditation sphere began its automatic resealing process, mechanical arms repositioning his helmet with pneumatic precision. The pain of reconnection was sharp and familiar, the mask's neural interface piercing into his damaged flesh. But pain was simply another tool, another reminder of what he'd lost and what he'd become. Show me, Vader commanded, his voice emerging with its characteristic mechanical rasp as he descended from the chamber into the bridge of the Superstar Destroyer Executor. The holographic projection showed the Dantooine battlefield, armored beings moving with impossible speed and power, energy shields that absorbed orbital bombardment, and a level of coordination that suggested either extensive military training or something deeper. Vader watched the recording 3 times, his force sensitivity reaching out across the light years to touch the echoes of what had occurred, and found nothing. No presence in the Force. These beings existed in the physical realm with undeniable power, but they left no ripples in the cosmic energy that bound all living things. It was as if they were holes in the Force itself, blank spaces where life should register, but didn't. Impossible, Vader murmured. My lord? Piet inquired carefully. They are not Jedi, Vader said, more to himself than his subordinate. Not Force-sensitive at all. Yet they possess abilities that rival or exceed what the Order could accomplish at its height. Admiral, what do we know of their origin? Piet consulted his datapad, grateful to have concrete information to provide. Very little, my lord. They arrived in a vessel of unknown design during Admiral Valen's patrol. Initial engagement resulted in unexpected complications. The Admiral reports that his crew experienced some form of mass hallucination or external mental influence. After they escaped, probe droids tracked them to Dantooine. Captain Voss's ground assault was repelled with minimal casualties on our side, but significant damage to our equipment and morale. Minimal casualties, Vader repeated, and there was something almost like interest in his mechanical voice. They chose not to kill. Yes, my lord. Intelligence suggests they were following rules of engagement consistent with defensive actions only. However, Admiral Valen has requested your personal intervention. He believes these beings represent a threat to... Admiral Valen is correct, Vader interrupted. He turned from the hologram to gaze out at the stars beyond the viewport. But not in the way he imagines. These beings are not the threat. The idea of them is. If word spreads that the Empire can be resisted without massive sacrifice, that beings exist who can stand against Star Destroyers and live, the rebellion will have a symbol more powerful than any weapon. Piet understood immediately. The Death Star had been precisely such a symbol in reverse. Overwhelming power that crushed hope. Its destruction had been a strategic disaster, not because of the loss of capability, but because of the loss of fear. These beings could become the opposite, a symbol that hope itself was powerful enough to matter. Set course for Dantooine, Vader ordered. Maximum speed, and prepare a Lambda-class shuttle. I will meet these beings personally. My lord, Admiral Valen's task force includes 3 Star Destroyers. If you require additional support, I require nothing but your obedience, Admiral. Vader's tone allowed no argument. These beings defeated stormtroopers and walkers through superior ability, not through numerical advantage. Sending more troops would simply provide them with more opportunities to demonstrate their power. No. This situation requires a different approach. What Vader didn't say, what he would never admit even to himself, was that he felt something when he touched the battlefield's echoes through the Force. Not the beings themselves. They remained stubbornly absent from his senses. But the choices they'd made, the restraint they'd shown, the almost Jedi-like discipline of using overwhelming power with precision rather than excess. It reminded him of something. Someone. A time before the mask and the pain and the endless service to the dark side. He crushed that thought before it could fully form. Back on Dantooine, the Eternals had made their decision. We help evacuate the remaining settlements, Ajak announced to Captain Ventress and her assembled crew. We provide protection for any civilians still in danger from the Imperial response. And then we'll discuss what comes next. It wasn't the unconditional alliance Ventress had hoped for, but the rebel captain was experienced enough to recognize a partial victory. That's a start. My ships can transport maybe 300 people. If you can provide cover during loading and takeoff. We can do more than that, Phastos interrupted. He'd been working through the night, his hands moving with manic energy as he cannibalized what remained of the Domo's systems. I can boost your ship's shield generators. Nothing permanent, but enough to withstand a few turbolaser hits if it comes to that. And I can jam Imperial targeting sensors within a 10-kilometer radius. Give me 2 hours. Ventress's eyebrows rose. You can do that? Our best engineers have been trying to crack Imperial targeting protocols for years. Your best engineers weren't created by Celestials, Phastos replied absently, already deep in his work. And they probably haven't had to jury-rig technology across universal physical constants. Your physics here are weird, but once you understand the underlying principles, the rest is just math. While Phastos worked his mechanical miracles, the rest of the Eternals coordinated the evacuation with Ventress's people. Cersei used her transmutation abilities to reinforce the freighter's structural weak points, literally changing the molecular composition of their hulls to something more durable. Makari scouted the surrounding territories at super speed, identifying which settlements were already evacuating and which needed assistance. Ikaris and Thena established a defensive perimeter, their enhanced senses monitoring the skies for the Imperial approach they all knew was coming. And Druig helped the refugees. Without his powers, without taking control or imposing order. He just carried children who couldn't keep up, found food for families who'd fled with nothing, used his 7,000 years of experience with human nature to mediate disputes between frightened people competing for limited space on the evacuation ships. It was harder than using his abilities. Messier. Less efficient. But when a young girl smiled at him after he'd found her lost doll in the chaos, something in his chest tightened in a way that controlling 1,000 minds had never achieved. "You're learning," Cersei said quietly, appearing beside him as they watched another group board Ventress's gunship. "Learning what? How to be useless?" "How to be human," Cersei corrected gently. "The Celestials made us powerful, but they didn't make us kind. That's something we have to choose. And you're choosing it now, even though it's harder." Before Druig could respond, Gilgamesh's voice boomed across the evacuation site. "Contacts! Multiple capital ships dropping out of hyperspace!" The sky seemed to darken as 3 Imperial Star Destroyers materialized in high orbit, their dagger profiles blotting out entire constellations. Their arrival was accompanied by a rolling pressure wave that made the air itself feel heavy, as if the Empire's presence had literal weight in the physical world. But it was the 4th ship that made even Ikaris pause. The Superstar Destroyer Executor dwarfed its escorts, a monument to Imperial engineering and overwhelming force. It was 11 kilometers of armor and weapons, bristling with enough firepower to level continents. And from its hangar bay, a single Lambda-class shuttle descended, accompanied by a full squadron of TIE fighters that maintained formation with parade ground precision. "That's not Admiral Valen's ship," Ventress said, her voice tight with fear she was trying to hide. "That's Vader's flagship. The Emperor's right hand is here, personally." Ajak felt something cold settle in her chest. "Who is Vader?" "Death." Kalen, the captured stormtrooper who'd been helping with the evacuation, said quietly. "Vader is death. He doesn't negotiate, doesn't compromise, doesn't lose. If he's here, it means the Emperor wants you badly enough to risk his most valuable asset." The Lambda shuttle landed a kilometer from the evacuation site, its ramp deploying with theatrical precision. And from the darkness within, a figure emerged that seemed to absorb the light around it. Darth Vader stood 2 meters tall in his black armor, his cape moving in a wind that didn't exist, his breathing a mechanical rasp that carried across the distance like a death rattle. Behind him, a dozen stormtroopers formed an honor guard. But everyone watching knew they were irrelevant. The threat was the man himself. "I am Darth Vader, Supreme Commander of the Imperial Forces." His voice rang out, amplified by technology and the weight of his reputation. "You have demonstrated abilities that make you persons of interest to the Galactic Empire. I am here to offer you a choice." "Let me guess," Ikaris said, his eyes beginning to glow. "Surrender or die?" "No," Vader replied, and there was something almost like respect in his mechanical voice. "Serve the Empire and bring order to a galaxy that desperately needs it. Or force me to eliminate the most interesting beings I've encountered in 20 years. Choose wisely. This offer will not be repeated." The Eternals stood together, ancient warriors facing a dark lord in a galaxy not their own. And for the first time since their arrival, they truly understood what they'd stumbled into. Not just a war between governments, but a fundamental conflict over what power meant and how it should be used. In the shuttle behind Vader, his sensors registered the Eternals' energy signatures with growing interest. Beings of such power, uncorrupted by the Force, unbound by its limitations. What could such warriors accomplish in service to the Empire? What could he accomplish with them at his side? But also, buried deep in the part of Anakin Skywalker that still existed within the mechanical horror. What would Padme have thought of beings who had such power and chose restraint? The standoff held for 30 seconds that felt like hours. Darth Vader, the Empire's Iron Fist, faced 10 beings whose very existence contradicted everything the Emperor had built his power upon. Behind the Eternals, 300 refugees held their breath, caught between hope and terror. Behind Vader, the Executor hung in orbit like a promise of annihilation. A Jock stepped forward, placing herself between her family and the Dark Lord. 7,000 years of leadership showed in her posture. Not defiant, not submissive, but measured, careful. You offer us service to the Empire. What would that service entail? Order, Vader replied simply. His mechanical breathing filled the silence between words. The galaxy is vast and chaotic. Trillions of beings pursue their own interests with no regard for the greater good. The Empire provides structure, stability, peace through strength. Your abilities would ensure compliance without excessive bloodshed. You would save lives. By taking away freedom, Cersei said, her voice carrying across the distance. We've seen your peace, conscription, forced tithes, planets sterilized for non-compliance. That's not order. That's tyranny. Vader's mask turned toward her, and even at this distance, the weight of his attention was palpable. Tyranny is merely governance viewed through the lens of those who refuse to accept necessity. The Republic failed because it valued sentiment over efficiency. Democracy collapsed into corruption and war. The Empire brought an end to that chaos. If the cost is individual freedom, it is a cost worth paying. Who decides that? Druig asked, and his voice carried an edge that made Ajak glance at him sharply. Who gets to choose between freedom and security for everyone else? Those with the strength to make hard choices, Vader replied. Those with the vision to see beyond individual suffering to collective survival. You possess such strength. The question is whether you have the vision to use it properly. Druig's eyes flickered gold for just a moment before he forced them back to normal. Ajak recognized the struggle. Vader's philosophy was dangerously close to the argument Druig had made just days ago. Control in service of protection, individual will sacrificed for the greater good. We need to discuss your offer, Ajak said carefully. Privately. You have 10 minutes, Vader stated. After that, you will provide your answer, or I will interpret your silence as refusal. And refusal comes with consequences. The Dark Lord gestured, and his escort formed a perimeter that was clearly meant to contain rather than threaten. But the implication was clear. Decide quickly, or the choice would be made for them. The Eternals gathered in a tight circle, their voices low and urgent. It's a trap, Ikaris said immediately. He's offering us a leash and calling it partnership. The moment we agree, we become Imperial weapons, extensions of the Emperor's will. But what he's saying isn't entirely wrong, Phastos admitted reluctantly. I've been analyzing Imperial technology, their infrastructure, their governance systems. For all its brutality, the Empire does provide stability. Trade routes are protected. Piracy is down. Systems that were war-torn under the Republic have been pacified. At what cost? Thena demanded. You saw the Death Star schematics. That's their idea of peacekeeping. Threaten entire worlds with extinction. Which is exactly why we might need to be on the inside, Sprite suggested. Her young features twisted with unexpected cunning. If we refuse, Vader kills us. If we run, they hunt us. But if we join, we get access to their systems, their secrets, their weaknesses. We could sabotage them from within. Or become them, Cersei countered. How long do you think we could pretend to serve before the pretending becomes real? Before we justify our first atrocity because it serves the greater good? Kingo, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. I've been thinking about our history. All the times we stood aside and let humanity make its own mistakes. All the wars we watched without intervening. Maybe Druig was right all along. Maybe our non-interference policy was just cowardice disguised as wisdom. Or maybe, Ajak said firmly, wisdom is knowing the difference between helping and controlling. Vader isn't offering us a chance to help people. He's offering us a chance to become tools of oppression. There's a difference. Is there? Druig's question was quiet, but cut deep. Because from where I'm standing, we've spent 7,000 years as tools. Tools of the Celestials. At least serving the Empire would be our choice. Would it? Gilgamesh rumbled. Because I'm not hearing a lot of choice in Vader's offer. Sounds more like serve or die to me. Makari's hands moved rapidly. What about the rebellion? Ventress offered us alliance without servitude. The rebellion is losing, Icarus pointed out. They destroyed one station, and now they're being hunted across the galaxy. Siding with them is choosing the losing team. Since when do we choose sides based on who's winning? Cersei's voice carried disappointment. We're supposed to be protectors, not opportunists. The argument spiraled, voices rising despite the need for discretion. Ancient resentments surfaced. Druig and Ajak's fundamental disagreement about interference. Icarus's frustration with what he saw as weakness. Sprite's cynicism versus Cersei's idealism. Phastos's pragmatism against Thena's warrior code. And through it all, Ajak felt the weight of leadership crushing down. Whatever she decided would fracture her family further. She could see it in their faces, hear it in their voices. There was no choice that would keep them united. Time's up, Vader's voice carried across the distance with mechanical precision. The Eternals turned as one to face him. Ajak opened her mouth to speak, but Druig was faster. I accept, he said, stepping forward from the group. I'll serve your empire. The shocked silence was absolute. Even Vader seemed momentarily surprised, his mask tilting slightly as if reassessing the situation. Druig, no, Ajak said, her voice breaking. You can't. I can, Druig interrupted, still moving toward Vader. And I am. You've all spent 10 minutes debating philosophy while 300 people stand terrified behind us. Vader wants Eternals? Fine, he gets one. The rest of you are free to make your own choices. You're making a mistake, Icarus warned, his eyes beginning to glow red with barely restrained power. Probably, Druig agreed, but it's my mistake to make. For 7,000 years, I've followed orders, Ajak's orders, the Celestials' orders. At least now I'm choosing my own path, even if it's the wrong one. He stopped 5 meters from Vader, his posture defiant despite his words of acceptance. I can control minds, thousands at once. I can make your enemies surrender without a shot fired. I can create order from chaos with a thought. But I have conditions. You are not in a position to negotiate, Vader replied, his mechanical voice flat and absolute. Aren't I? Druig's eyes blazed gold, and for just a moment, the stormtroopers in Vader's honor guard stiffened as his power touched their minds. Not taking control, just demonstrating capability. Because from where I'm standing, you want us badly enough to come here personally. You're not here to kill us. You're here to recruit us. which means I have leverage. So here are my terms. I serve, but the civilians behind us go free. No retaliation, no pursuit. They evacuate to wherever they want, and the Empire forgets they exist. Vader was silent for a long moment, his Force senses reaching out to touch Druig's consciousness. What he found confused him. Determination mixed with self-loathing, sacrifice disguised as betrayal, and underneath it all, a genuine belief that this was somehow the right choice. Acceptable, Vader said finally. The refugees will be allowed to depart. You have my word. The word of a Sith Lord, Druig laughed bitterly. I'm sure that's worth a lot. But I'll trust it because I have no choice. Just like you're trusting that I won't immediately try to control you the moment I'm on your ship. You will find my mind resistant to external influence, Vader replied. And there was something almost like dark amusement in his mechanical voice. The Force provides protection from such abilities, but your willingness to serve is noted. Come. Druig turned back to his family one last time. Ajak's face was streaked with tears, the first time he'd seen her cry in millennia. Cersei looked like he'd physically struck her. Even Ikaris seemed shaken, his usual stoic expression cracked by genuine shock. I'm sorry, Druig said quietly. But someone had to choose. Someone always has to choose. He walked toward Vader's shuttle, each step feeling like it covered miles. Behind him, he heard Ajak's voice break as she called his name. Heard Cersei sobbing, heard the others arguing about whether to stop him or let him go. But he didn't turn back. Couldn't turn back. Because if he looked at their faces again, he'd lose his nerve, and 300 people would die for his cowardice. Vader watched Druig approach with interest, this being walked toward potential servitude with his eyes open, making a conscious choice to sacrifice himself for others. It was familiar, uncomfortable. A reminder of choices Anakin Skywalker had once made before the dark path consumed him. You are not what I expected, Vader admitted as Druig reached the shuttle ramp. Neither are you, Druig replied. I expected a monster. But you're just a man in a metal cage, serving masters who don't care if you live or die as long as you're useful. We're more alike than either of us wants to admit. Vader's hand moved to his lightsaber, but he didn't draw it. Instead, he simply turned and walked up the ramp. Follow me. You have much to learn about serving the Empire properly. As the shuttle began to lift off, Druig looked out the viewport at his family one last time. They stood together in the Dantooine dust, united in their shock and loss. Without him to argue against Ajak's caution, without his challenges to force them into difficult choices. He'd spent 7,000 years believing he was right, and they were wrong. Now, rising toward the Executor in the company of darkness itself, Druig realized he had no idea who was right. He only knew that standing aside while people suffered was something he could no longer do, even if action meant damnation. The shuttle bay doors closed behind him with a sound like destiny sealing shut. On the ground, Ajak watched the shuttle depart with Druig aboard and felt something inside her break that no amount of healing power could mend. Her family was fracturing, pulled apart by ideology and impossible choices in a galaxy that demanded decision without granting wisdom. And 3 star destroyers hung in orbit, silent witnesses to the first Eternal who chose the darkness, believing it was light. The evacuation proceeded in stunned silence. Captain Ventress's ships loaded refugees with mechanical efficiency while the remaining Eternals stood guard. But the heart had gone out of the operation. Every few minutes, someone would glance at the sky where the Executor hung like a malevolent star and wonder what was happening to Druig in its metal corridors. Aboard the Superstar Destroyer, Druig was learning exactly what he'd traded his freedom for. Vader led him through pristine corridors where stormtroopers snapped to attention and officers averted their eyes in fear. The Empire's flagship was a monument to order. Every surface polished, every crew member moving with purpose, every system functioning with absolute precision. It should have been impressive. Instead, it felt like walking through a mausoleum where the dead just hadn't realized they were corpses yet. "You will be stationed with the Inquisitorius initially," Vader explained, his cape billowing behind him despite the absence of wind. "They are Force-sensitive agents who hunt the remaining Jedi. Your abilities would complement their mission." "Hunting Jedi?" Druig's voice was carefully neutral. "I thought they were extinct." "Nearly." Vader's tone carried satisfaction and something else. Something that might have been regret in a being capable of such emotion. But fragments remain. Padawans who escaped Order 66, masters who went into hiding. They represent a threat to Imperial stability and must be eliminated. They entered a turbo lift that descended into the ship's secure levels. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, as if warmth itself was being systematically removed. "What if I refuse?" Druig asked. "What if I decide hunting survivors isn't what I signed up for?" Vader turned his mask toward him, and Druig felt something press against his mind. Not taking control like his own power did, but probing, testing, seeking weakness with the Force. It was invasive in a way that made his skin crawl, but his cosmic physiology resisted the intrusion naturally. Vader's Force probe slid off his consciousness like water off stone. "Interesting," Vader murmured, noting the resistance. "Your mind is different. The Force touches you but does not penetrate. This will require adjustment to my methods." "That doesn't answer my question," Druig pressed. "Then you will discover that the Empire has methods of ensuring cooperation that do not require your consent." Vader replied coldly. "I would prefer a willing servant, but I will accept an obedient one." The turbo lift opened onto a detention level, and Vader gestured for Druig to follow. They walked past cells containing various prisoners, rebel sympathizers, political dissidents, captured alien species deemed threats to human-centric Imperial policy. Some called out for help. Others simply stared with dead eyes that had already accepted their fate. Vader stopped before one cell in particular. Inside, a young woman in tattered Jedi robes sat in meditation, her hands bound with Force-suppressing restraints. She couldn't have been more than 20, her face still holding traces of adolescent softness beneath the bruises and malnutrition. "Padawan Kira Ven," Vader announced. "Captured 3 weeks ago on Lothal. She refuses to reveal the location of her master. Your abilities could extract this information in seconds." Druig stared at the young woman, and she stared back. There was defiance in her eyes, but also fear. The fear of someone who knew exactly what torture awaited and was trying to prepare for it. "You want me to take over her mind," Druig said flatly. "Force her to betray someone she loves." "I want you to serve the Empire efficiently," Vader corrected. "The method is your choice. But understand, if you refuse, I will extract the information through more traditional means. The Padawan will suffer extensively before she breaks. Your power would be a mercy." It was a perfect trap, and Druig recognized it instantly. Refuse, and he'd have to watch torture knowing he could stop it. Comply, and he'd become exactly what he'd feared. A tool for tyranny, justifying each violation with the excuse that the alternative was worse. His eyes began to glow gold. "Don't," the Padawan whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming during previous interrogations. "Please, don't make me betray him. I'd rather die." Druig's power reached out, touching her mind with the gentlest pressure. Not taking control, just sensing. He felt her fear, her determination, her absolute conviction that protecting her master was worth any personal cost. She was terrified, but resolute, broken, but undefeated. She reminded him of Ajak, of Cersei, of everyone he'd left behind on Dantooine. His power withdrew, and his eyes returned to normal. "No." Vader's breathing filled the silence. "No. I won't do it," Druig said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "I agreed to serve. I didn't agree to become a monster." "The distinction," Vader replied coldly, "is irrelevant. You will obey, or you'll torture me too?" Druig interrupted. "Fine, do it. Because I just realized something in that cell. I've spent 7,000 years afraid of becoming a tyrant by using my power. But the real tyranny isn't using power. It's using it without conscience. And whatever I am, whatever mistakes I've made, I'm not that. Not yet." For a long moment, Vader simply stared at him through the mask's empty lenses. The Dark Lord's hand moved toward his lightsaber, and Druig braced himself for pain or death or both. Then, surprisingly, Vader turned away from the cell. "You are either remarkably brave or catastrophically foolish," Vader said. "Come, we will discuss your service in more productive terms." As they left the detention level, Druig glanced back at the Padawan. She nodded once, a tiny gesture of respect between two people who'd both chosen suffering over surrender. Back on Dantooine, the last evacuation ship was preparing for departure. Ajak stood with Ventress, watching Phastos make final adjustments to the enhanced shields he'd jury-rigged onto the freighters. "Your friend made an impossible choice," Ventress said quietly, "sacrificing himself to save others. That's the kind of courage the rebellion is built on." "Is it?" Ajak's voice was hollow. "Or did he just choose the easier path? Fighting is simpler than thinking. Action feels better than restraint." "Sometimes action is all we have," Ventress replied. She handed Ajak a small device, a rebel comm unit. "If you change your mind about staying neutral, use this. We could use beings like you, not as weapons, as symbols that the Empire can be resisted." Ajak took the device but didn't activate it. "What if we make things worse? What if our presence escalates the conflict and more people die?" "More people are dying every day under Imperial rule," Ventress said bluntly. "The question isn't whether people will suffer. They're already suffering. The question is whether you're going to help end that suffering or stand aside while it continues." The last freighter lifted off, engines roaring as Phastos' shields flared to life around its hull. Star destroyers in orbit tracked its departure but didn't fire. Vader had given his word, and apparently even Dark Lords occasionally kept their promises. "We need to vote," Ajak announced to the assembled Eternals, "on what we do next. I won't make this decision alone anymore." They gathered in the Domo's ruins, 9 now instead of 10. The absence of Druig a physical weight in the circle. "I vote we join the rebellion," Cersei said immediately. "Druig sacrificed himself to save people. The least we can do is make sure it meant something." "I vote we leave," Sprite countered. "Find an uninhabited world. Wait for the Empire and Rebellion to exhaust themselves. Then maybe we can help rebuild whatever's left." "I vote we hunt down every Imperial installation we can find and tear them apart," Icarus growled, his eyes glowing faintly with barely contained rage. "They took one of ours. We make them pay." "I vote we gather intelligence first," Phastos suggested. "Learn the full scope of the conflict. Make informed decisions instead of emotional ones." Thena's vote was simple. "I follow Ajak, whatever she decides." Gilgamesh nodded agreement. "Same, we're family. Families stick together." Kingo looked torn. I don't know. Part of me wants revenge for Druig. Part of me thinks he made his own choice and we should respect it by not starting a war in his name. Makari's hands moved. I vote we do what Druig would want. Protect the innocent. Whether that means fighting the Empire or finding another way. All eyes turned to Ajak. The vote was effectively split, which meant her decision would determine their path. 7,000 years of leadership had prepared her for many things, but not this. Choosing between loyalty to one family member and the principles that had defined their existence. She thought of the Celestials' directive: protect humanity. But which humanity? The ones suffering under the Empire? The ones serving it out of fear? The rebels fighting against impossible odds? Druig, now trapped aboard a ship of darkness, trying to maintain his soul in service to monsters? I vote, Ajak began, then stopped as proximity alarms blared throughout the Domo's failing systems. New ships were arriving, but not Imperial. 3 rebel corvettes dropped out of hyperspace, broadcasting emergency signals. And on the lead ship's bridge, a hologram activated automatically, showing a familiar figure in white armor and a flowing cape. Princess Leia Organa, one of the rebellion's most prominent leaders, looked exhausted but determined. Unknown beings on Dantooine. This is Princess Leia of Alderaan, speaking on behalf of the Alliance to restore the Republic. We've monitored your engagement with Imperial forces. We know one of your number has been taken by Darth Vader, and we're here to propose something that might be insane. A rescue mission to retrieve him from the Executor itself. The hologram flickered, and Leia's expression softened slightly. I understand if you don't trust us. I understand if you want nothing to do with our war. But your friend, Druig, Captain Ventress called him, he sacrificed himself to save civilians. That's exactly the kind of courage and compassion the galaxy needs more of. Let us help you get him back. And in return, well, we'll figure that out if we survive. The hologram cut out, leaving the Eternals staring at each other in stunned silence. Ajak felt something shift inside her. A recognition that neutrality was no longer possible, if it ever had been. They'd been dragged into this conflict the moment they'd arrived in this galaxy. The only question now was whether they'd face it together or fracture completely. We get Druig back, she announced, her voice carrying the absolute authority of 7 millennia. We infiltrate Vader's ship. We extract our family member, and then we'll decide what comes next. But we do it together, all of us. No more fracturing, no more individual choices that split the family. We're Eternals. We're strongest when we're united. That's going to start a war, Ikaris pointed out. We're already in a war, Ajak replied, finally accepting what she'd been avoiding since their arrival. We just didn't realize it yet. The Empire won't stop hunting us. Vader won't release Druig. And standing aside means watching this galaxy burn while we pretend our hands are clean. She activated Ventress's comm unit. Princess Leia, this is Ajak. We accept your offer. Tell us your plan and we'll help you make it work. But understand, if Druig dies because of this, your rebellion will learn exactly what ancient, angry gods are capable of. Leia's response crackled through. Understood, and thank you. Transmitting rendezvous coordinates now. May the Force be with you. We don't need the Force, Ajak replied, looking at her family, her fractured, determined, impossible family. We have each other, and that's always been enough. In orbit aboard the Executor, Druig sat in a Spartan cell, his hands bound with restraints designed for Force users. They wouldn't hold him. His power didn't work through the Force. But he left them on anyway, playing the role of obedient prisoner while his mind raced. He'd made a terrible mistake. He'd thought sacrifice meant accepting servitude. But real sacrifice, he was starting to understand, meant fighting even when fighting seemed hopeless. And somewhere in the ship's detention levels, Padawan Kira Ven meditated in her cell, holding on to hope that had just gotten slightly less impossible. The Eternals were coming. And when they arrived, the Empire would learn what beings who'd protected humanity for 7,000 years could do when they stopped holding back. The rebel medical frigate Redemption hung in the darkness between stars, its hyperdrive cooling after 6 consecutive jumps to shake Imperial pursuit. In its medical bay, Druig lay on a bed while Ajak's healing powers worked to repair damage from Vader's force choke. Around him, the Eternals gathered, exhausted, wounded, but together. Druig's eyes flickered open, and the first thing he saw was Ajak's face, tears streaming down her cheeks. In 7,000 years, he'd seen her cry maybe 3 times. "You came," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Of course we came," Ajak said, her hands glowing brighter as she accelerated his healing. "We're family. We don't abandon family. Even when they make catastrophically stupid decisions and side with Dark Lords?" Druig managed a weak smile. "Especially then," Cersei said, appearing at his other side. She took his hand, her transmutation powers unconsciously checking his molecular structure for hidden damage. "You tried to save everyone by sacrificing yourself. It was noble and idiotic in equal measure." "Sounds about right," Druig admitted. He tried to sit up, but Ajak pushed him back down gently but firmly. "Rest. You're healing, but Vader's attack went deep. Your neural pathways are still repairing." She looked at the others. "He'll be fine, physically. But we need to talk about what happens next." Princess Leia entered the medical bay, her diplomatic composure barely masking exhaustion that matched their own. "I don't mean to interrupt your reunion, but you should know what's happening out there. The story of your rescue is spreading through rebel networks faster than we can contain it. 9 beings boarded Vader's flagship, fought through thousands of crew members, extracted a prisoner, and escaped with minimal casualties. You've become legends in the span of hours." "We didn't do it for glory," Ikaris said, his usual stoic expression softened by relief at having Druig back. "We did it because he's family." "I know," Leia replied, "and that's exactly why it matters. The Empire rules through fear and overwhelming force. You've just demonstrated that loyalty, courage, and unity can overcome both. Planets that were too frightened to resist are reconsidering. Rebel cells that were going dormant are reactivating. You've given people something they desperately needed. Proof that the Empire can be beaten." Padawan Kira Ven, the young Jedi they'd freed during the extraction, stood quietly in the corner. She'd been given medical attention and clean robes, but her eyes still held the haunted look of someone who'd survived torture. "What you did," she said softly. "It reminded me why the Jedi were supposed to exist. Not as warriors or generals, as protectors. You protected someone you loved, and in doing so you protected me too. I won't forget that." Druig finally managed to sit up, ignoring Ajak's disapproving look. "I learned something aboard that ship. When Vader tried to make me torture her," he nodded toward Kira, "I realized that power without conscience is just tyranny with a different face. I spent 7,000 years afraid of becoming a monster by using my abilities. But the real test isn't whether you have power. It's what you choose to do with it." "That's what I've been trying to tell you for millennia," Ajak said. But there was no anger in her voice, only relief. "I know," Druig admitted. I wasn't ready to hear it. Sometimes you have to make terrible mistakes before wisdom makes sense. Makari's hands moved in rapid sign language. So what now? We rescued Druig. The Empire knows we exist and what we can do. We can't hide anymore. No, Ajak agreed. We can't, which means we need to decide, together, what we are in this galaxy. The debate that followed was shorter than expected. Perhaps it was exhaustion. Perhaps it was the clarity that came from nearly losing one of their own. But for the first time since arriving in this galaxy, the Eternals found themselves in genuine agreement. I vote we stay and fight, Gilgamesh said simply. The Empire is everything we've spent millennia opposing. Tyranny, oppression, genocide is policy. If we run now, we're saying power matters more than principle. I vote we join the rebellion, Cersei added. Not as weapons or symbols, but as allies. We help them fight, and we make sure the fight stays honorable. No becoming the thing we oppose. One by one, they voted. Ikaris for action over hiding. Thena for combat with purpose. Phastos for using his genius against tyranny. Kingo for standing with the oppressed. Sprite for being part of something meaningful. Makari for protecting the innocent. And Druig, his voice still rough but growing stronger. I vote we do what the Celestials never let us do. Actually help people instead of just watching them suffer. Fight the Empire. Protect the vulnerable. And prove that power can be used for something other than control. All eyes turned to Ajak. Her vote would make it unanimous or create the first dissent. She looked at her family. Fractured and reunited, tested and tempered, finally aligned in purpose, if not always in method. I vote we stay, she said, her voice carrying the weight of 70 centuries. We ally with the rebellion. We fight the Empire. We protect people who can't protect themselves. And we do it as Eternals, with all the power and wisdom 7,000 years has given us. She turned to Princess Leia. We'll help you fight, but on our terms. We don't kill unnecessarily. We protect civilians above all else. And we reserve the right to question orders that violate our principles. Leia smiled, and for the first time since Alderaan's destruction, it reached her eyes. Those terms are acceptable. Welcome to the rebellion. We're honored to have you. Don't be honored yet, Phastos warned, pulling up data he'd stolen from the Executor. What we just did was declare war on the most powerful military force this galaxy has ever seen. Vader will hunt us. The Emperor will want us dead or controlled. Every Imperial asset will be looking for us. Good, Thena said, manifesting a golden spear that glowed like captured starlight. Let them look. When they find us, they'll learn what beings who've protected humanity for 7,000 years can do when they stop holding back. Aboard the Executor, Darth Vader stood before the Emperor's hologram, his report clinical and precise. But when Palpatine's withered face twisted with fury at the escape, Vader allowed himself one silent observation. The Eternals had demonstrated something dangerous. That loyalty freely given created strength no amount of force power could match. Find them, the Emperor hissed. Bring them to me, or destroy them. I will not tolerate beings who exist outside the Force challenging my empire. As you wish, my master, Vader replied. But as the hologram faded, Vader touched the place where Thena's cosmic spear had nearly pierced his armor, and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Anticipation. These beings would test him, push him, perhaps even break him. Or perhaps he would break them. Either way, their next meeting would be legendary. In the Redemption's observation deck, the Eternals stood together, watching hyperspace stream past. They'd come to this galaxy by accident, lost and displaced. They would stay by choice, committed and purposeful. The Empire would learn to fear the name Eternal. The rebellion would learn that hope came from unexpected places. And across a galaxy far, far away, 7,000-year-old protectors prepared for a war that would test everything they were. Their story was just beginning. The weeks that followed transformed the Eternals from refugees into legends. Their rescue of Druig became the story whispered in Rebel safe houses and Imperial detention centers alike. Proof that even Vader could be defied. Ajak became an advisor to Alliance leadership, her millennia of wisdom invaluable. Ikaris and Thena led impossible rescue operations, their power turning suicide missions into victories. Phastos reverse-engineered Imperial technology, giving rebels advantages they'd never possessed. Cersei transmuted barren worlds into refugee havens. Druig, changed by his time aboard the Executor, became the voice ensuring their methods honored their goals. Padawan Kira Ven found her master, and together they began rebuilding what the Jedi should have been. Servants, not warriors. The Empire learned to fear beings who existed outside the Force. Vader prepared obsessively for their next confrontation. And Emperor Palpatine, sensing a threat beyond his control, began plotting how to destroy or dominate these ancient warriors. But the Eternals had 7,000 years of experience protecting humanity. They'd fought deviants, survived the emergence, and crossed the void between realities. The Empire, for all its might, was just another tyrant to oppose. Their war had begun, and this time they would not stand aside while people suffered.